adopted and fostered children, because they have nothing to calibrate their history on, they have to deeply reflect within themselves of discovering who they are for themselves and their actual potential. And that was something that really resonates with me. Of, I don't try and find myself in my parents and my adoptive parents. I really try and look within myself for who I want to be.
Ah, that's so powerful. Your dream is to become a mom. My dream is to help you get there. I'm Rebecca Gruenspan, a single mom through domestic adoption and an adoption consultant for over a decade. I'll be your guide, along with other adoption professionals and members of the adoption constellation, walking you step by step down this beautiful and complex path of adopting your baby. When I was going through the adoption process, I had no idea what I was doing, what I needed to know, or more importantly, who to trust. Well, after helping hundreds and hundreds of families grow through the beauty and complexity of adoption, I've learned more than a thing or two, and let me tell you, it's not always rainbows and butterflies. This isn't just another podcast sharing adoption stories, but it's for you if you're genuinely committed to diving in with an open heart, eager to learn everything there is to know about adopting a baby so that you can show up for yourself and your child in the best way possible. This podcast is for you if you're ready to put your newfound knowledge into action. Adoption isn't for the weak of heart, and it certainly isn't done when your baby gets placed in your arms. If that's what you think, I'm afraid you're living in la la land. My promise to you is to keep it real if you promise to keep digging. We'll acknowledge the hard, and we'll also celebrate the joy that is adoption. You ready? Let's do this. Today on the Adoption Roadmap podcast, I'm sitting down with Josie Mi, the newest member of my RG adoption consulting team and a Chinese-American adoptee with a fascinating journey of self-discovery. Born in China and raised in the vibrant cultures of Los Angeles and Ann Arbor, Michigan, Josie's story is a tapestry woven with threads of heritage, family, and personal growth. An actor by profession when she's not working with me, Josie shares not only her parents' career, but also their creative spirit. From her first trip back to China as a teenager to mastering the art of Chinese cooking, Josie's narrative is a compelling blend of introspection and exploration. Tune in to hear how she has navigated her identity, from therapy insights to embracing her unique middle name in everyday life. Welcome, 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 Josie. It's so great to have you share your story with all of us. I'm grateful for your time, and I'm going to jump right in with the first question, okay?
Okay.
Here we go. Growing up as a transracial adoptee, what was your earliest memory of feeling a connection to your Chinese heritage?
I think that my parents were always really transparent with me about how I was adopted, where I'm from, their whole adoption story of they went to China to adopt me. So yeah, growing up, it was always a part of my life. They made sure that I was part of other Chinese and Asian adoptee groups. So I was always very aware of the community that was there and the support that was there. And yeah, I spent my early years in Los Angeles until I was around 6, going on 7. So it was long enough that the vibrant Chinese American and Asian American community there was very much a part of my life. And my parents would take me to Chinatown and make sure that we would go down there for Chinese New Year and other celebrations and holidays. So yeah, it was always a huge part of my life. And my mom always made sure that we celebrated those holidays and that she had like a traditional Chinese dress for me growing up that I would wear. And she made sure that I was comfortable by asking if I wanted to wear it to school during the holidays and stuff like that. So it was always very prevalent. Yeah. And they made me feel very comfortable with when I wanted to embrace it and when I didn't. So I'm grateful.
That's really cool because, adopting transracially or transculturally, with different ethnicities, it's so important. I'm curious if you felt like all these wonderful things that they did right in your eyes, because I get that feeling. Did you ever feel like they were doing it just for you specifically, that you felt like they were putting the spotlight on you, or did you feel like they were doing it because that was how your family unit was? You know what I mean?
Um, I think it was definitely a combination of both. I
Mm-hmm.
think that I, as I got older, especially had more boundaries with my relationship with my heritage and with my culture. Like I was pretty clear with my mom of when I wanted to stop going to Chinese school.
Mm.
That was something that I think she really wanted for me, and to be around other kids my age that were not just Chinese adoptees, but other Chinese kids who were growing up Chinese American. But that wasn't something that I resonated with. And because we didn't speak the language at home, that didn't make
Mm.
sense to me to go to Chinese school or anything like that. So there were times when I kind of said no and would think about it, but would still say no. My mom would check in with me at different points of making sure that, oh, just because I said this one thing of not wanting to go to Chinese school, she would check back maybe, I don't know, 6 months later, a
Mm.
year later to see if that was still what I wanted. And she respected if it was. It was funny because later on when I probably reached 15, 16, I'm like, why didn't you make me go? And
I,
she
I was
said,
going to
because
ask.
you didn't want to. um, so yeah, I think that they really let me lead on that front, but it was also how our family unit operated.
I mean, you bring up a really good point. So I was going to ask you, are you glad you went? And the whole question is, sometimes I struggle with how much do I let my child lead? He's a child versus pushing what I think he'll want, he'll thank me for later on in life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think for the most part they let me lead because I was just a very strong-willed, confident. Like this was probably around the age of 5 and 6 of when I started to express that I didn't want to go to Chinese school anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, because I was very confident in that decision, my mom was like, "Okay, then I won't fight you
I won't
on
make you.
it." Yeah,
And
especially because I think that the Asian American kids that I grew up around, they were particularly a lot of first generation kids. So it was the language that they spoke at home. They came from immigrant backgrounds. And again, that just wasn't something that I identified with and
right.
felt a hard time relating to for the most part.
Yeah,
And
I think that's a difference too, right there is,
yeah,
are you around people whose whole family is from that background, that they speak a different language than you speak at home, versus the newer generations where maybe they're speaking more English at home and it feels more like you.
yeah. And I think that that was also part of moving from the West Coast to the
Uh,
Midwest,
yeah.
of being in Los Angeles. It's a melting pot. You have a lot of different cultures. You have
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cultural communities that have been there a very long time and are really well established. And there's a much larger support network within those communities for the diaspora. So, for example, being a
Yeah.
part of the Chinese American and Asian adoptee community, there was there were groups for that. There were support groups. There were I went to a Chinese class that was just for adoptees when I was there.
Hmm.
And then in the Midwest, there's just less of that.
Yeah.
The communities, they're further apart,
Mm.
they're sparse. So, yeah, I think that once we moved to Michigan, it just became less of a priority for me personally in my life. But my mom, even when we did move to Michigan, she really tried to make sure that I had the support that I needed if I wanted it.
Did any of your other family members beyond your immediate family in your household partake in any of the Chinese celebrations that your household did?
Uh, I'm trying to think. Not so much, just because I do have a cousin who's also adopted from China. She's 5 years
Oh,
older
yeah.
than me, but she grew up in a different state. So, just in terms of proximity, we weren't close, and I only saw her maybe once a year. So, I didn't celebrate with her. A lot of the time, celebrating Chinese holidays, it would be more of just our family unit who would celebrate rather than my extended family. But I've
Hmm.
definitely brought my culture to my extended family in
Yeah.
various ways. Of at Christmas, I have made dumplings and things.
I love
So
that.
yeah, and they've been really receptive to that.
That's awesome. I asked because there have been times in my life where I've asked some of my extended family, oh, do you want to come to this Mexican Heritage Day or whatever? And they haven't. And I stop and I think to myself, do I wish they would? Do I not? Does it matter to my son? Does it not? And so did it matter to you if they did or didn't? Did it bother you? Or
Mm,
did you ever feel like you stood out in your family or didn't feel supported in your family at large?
I don't think it really bothered me. I think that, especially during that period of time when I was around my extended family more, because my extended family is mostly in Michigan. So
Mm-hmm.
when I moved to Michigan, that was who I was around. Um, I think that, yeah, from that kind of point in time of being, I don't know, a little bit older, of understanding that, oh, a lot of people here in the Midwest don't look like me. Um, it definitely came at a time where I was not prioritizing my relationship with my culture as much.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, because I didn't have a lot of friends anymore who were Asian or Chinese American or really people of color for that matter.
Mhm.
Um, it wasn't something that I thought about as much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it didn't bother me.
I think my son would say the same thing or that he
Yeah.
just never really thought about it, but it's something I thought about. So you were adopted right before your first birthday and didn't return to China again until you were 17. Tell me how that trip came to be and what it was like for you.
Uh, yeah, my parents, they always wanted to go back to China with me at some point. I forget the exact decision making of why that year, but I do know that leading up to probably the couple of years prior,
Mhm.
I had expressed more interest of going back to China. I had started taking Chinese again in high school. I
Mhm.
had been asking more questions about my adoption. And my mom was like, well, you're going to college soon. You're going to be busy. We don't know when we can make this happen again. So I think that we need to do it this summer or next summer, because after that, you're just going to leave. um, so yeah, I had
Little
been
did they know you'd come back, but
yeah,
whatever.
I had been asking more questions about like, what information do you know? I mean, again, my parents had always been transparent with me, but I was still wondering, like, I don't think I had ever read my records before until I was
Mm.
probably 15 or 16. So it was more specific information that they didn't have answers to. So I started talking about, oh, I'd really like to go back. I'd like to visit where I'm from. Um, do you know if we can go to the welfare institute that I was at
Mm.
before I was adopted? And my parents were like, let's make it all happen. So we went to China for 2 weeks and we went all over China. And one of the last stops was they adopted me. I'm from Jiangxi province, and they adopted me in the capital city of that province, which is Nanchang. But I'm from a city maybe like 2 or 3 hours outside of that. And it's funny because they had always been told that it was this small, nothing town. And then we got there and it was a city of 500,000 people.
Oh my goodness. Is that still small nothing to China?
Yeah, I think
oh my
so.
Goodness.
But yeah, it was a very cool experience to go and experience the whole country itself. But to go back to where I was actually from was very powerful.
Yeah,
and I'll never forget that.
Yeah, tell me more about that. What did that bring up for you? Did you find anyone who knew you or your parents or?
Unfortunately, the Chinese government didn't do a great job of keeping records at that time. So we were unable to track down most of the staff who was working at the Welfare Institute when I was there. And I didn't have any information on my person when I arrived at the Institute. So there's no knowledge of my prior history in my prior life, really. As far as like what I took away from going there and visiting, I think that I wasn't able to process it at that time when I was 17. I think that that took me a lot of time to process in the years following. And I think that, yeah, it was really powerful for me to go and understand that that was where I was as a infant. And it still is hard for me to put 2 and 2 together of that's where I was at that time in my life, because to me, I'm like, this is a new place that I'm visiting. But I look back on it and I think, wow, that's really cool that I got to go there. I don't know if I'd go back just because it is a very rundown town. It's not a great area. It's really sad for me to think that the people who live in that part of the world don't have access to the things that I've had access to in my life. So there's a lot of different levels and things to process, and I still think about it in ways of, wow, what a different life I could have had. Yeah. I think that that's common for adoptees to question, though, of like, oh, in another life.
Yeah. Not having any background of who you came from or anything about that part of your life. What meaning have you put to that, if any? Like, what is that for you?
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot. So I'm an actor. We haven't really talked about that yet, but I think that one of the reasons that that became a huge passion for me was to discover all the possible versions of myself.
Ah, that is cool.
And I think that that absolutely has to do with my adoptee background of not having a history, of not having answers to questions and not knowing who exactly I am. Is I kind of get to create that for myself. I really like the poet. Do you know who Lem Sisay is? He is a British poet, and I believe he grew up in the foster care system. And I was listening to an interview with him recently, and he talks about how adopted and fostered children, because they aren't, because they have nothing to calibrate their history on, they have to deeply reflect within themselves of discovering who they are for themselves and their actual potential. And that was something that really resonates with me, of I don't try and find myself in my parents and my adoptive parents. I really try and look within myself for who I want to be.
Ah, that's so powerful. And a lesson that literally everyone in the whole planet should listen to. Look within inside of yourself to figure out who you are and who you want to be. Don't look at the outside world or what could have been or what would have been or what should have been. I love that. Good for you. I mean, that's how did you come to that? Was that the poet that like inspired that in you?
No, I think that that's been a huge theme of my life, of trying to figure out who I am, of trying everything under the sun. My parents, they never really forced me to do anything. They were like, if you want to try something, try it.
I love that.
So I'm always up for trying something at least once.
Well, one thing you tried, and I'm guessing had a big part in this whole trying to discover who you are from within, is through cooking, which it like sings to me. I love that because food is such a huge part of culture, of love, of life, of connection, of adventure, of everything. And cooking became a big part of your healing journey, I think. So tell us a little bit about that and how you came to this connection. And if you have a favorite dish you've mastered, maybe you could share a recipe that we could link.
I think, like a lot of people, cooking became a pandemic hobby.
Oh, okay. Yep.
When everyone was into their sourdough starters and things, I was right there with all of those people.
I love it.
But yes, on top of having a sourdough starter and just
do you still have it?
I don't.
Okay.
I should start a new one. Yeah, I decided to pick up new cookbooks, and I found myself particularly delving into Chinese cooking, and it just became, a very healing ritual in a way, of going down to the Asian supermarket that was closest to me and learning about new vegetables and learning about new ingredients and slowly bringing those into my own cooking, and watching a lot of YouTube videos on how to make different things. And I was living alone through a lot of the pandemic, and my mom would call me and ask me, oh, what are you cooking tonight? And I'm like, oh, I'm braising pork. And she'd be like, I'm sorry, what? And I said, yes, I'm braising pork. And she's like, I don't know how you do that, but okay. And I would like to try some the next time you come home. And it was just really fun for me to learn about these different parts of my culture that I hadn't explored before and wasn't part of my diet growing up. But now when I am home with my parents, they ask me to cook.
What's your favorite thing to cook?
I mean, I'd say that all of my friends and my family really enjoy my dumplings. I think that that's a very well-known and favorite Chinese dish, but I do think that I make good dumplings.
Sweet. I don't live too far from Michigan, so dumplings have... In fact, it's funny you say that, because I can't remember if you were on this meeting or not when we talked about the perfect food. I was talking about that with somebody, and I said the perfect food is a ravioli or some sort of dumpling, because you have your carbs, you have your protein, and all your deliciousness in there. I mean, I think it's perfect.
I think that every culture has a form of dumpling.
I know.
I really do.
Yeah. And when our old, not that old, but our last marketing person, she was Syrian, and one of her favorite things was a dolmades, which is a rolled. It's not a dumpling, but it's with meat and the wrap around it. In the Jewish culture, it's a kreplach. It's the dough with the meat inside. You got Chinese dumplings, you've
I
got
have
wontons,
pierogies. Yeah.
pierogies. It is the perfect food, ravioli. What has cooking done for you, for your identity, for you spiritually? What has it meant for you in that way? Or has it?
Well, so I once my family moved to Michigan and growing up in the Midwest, and then I went to college in Chicago. Uh, Throughout that period of my life, I didn't have a lot of people who looked like me to look up to or to ask questions, and I didn't have a lot of friends whose background resonated with mine.
Hmm.
So overall, I grew up very culturally white for the most part. Um, Even though like I knew about the traditional holidays and things like that, and again, my parents would make sure that we would have Chinese food during Chinese New Year and stuff like that. On the day to day, it really wasn't a huge part of my life. And picking up cooking during the pandemic was a way for me to, I guess, reclaim it for
Mm-hmm.
myself, because no one was forcing me or saying, "Oh, you should learn about this thing." It really came from myself and my own curiosity to learn more. And at first, I didn't think of it as like, "Oh, I'm going to reconnect with my culture and try to be something that I'm also not," which is someone who grew up in an Asian household. I do think that there is pressure with transracial adoptees is
Mm-hmm.
to, when you do come in contact with parts of your culture, to embrace that in a way where then you're trying to take on that whole culture in one go, in a way of, I think that when I'm around my Asian American friends who aren't adoptees, I do feel a tendency to relate to them as much as possible.
Mm.
And I think that that is something that I've also let go of by embracing the parts that do resonate with me and the parts that don't, is just to let those go. And cooking for me, though, that's on my own terms. And I find myself being able to combine ingredients from all of the different cultures that feel like a part of me, because
Yeah.
yeah, I grew up with very like German family, and we certainly have foods from that background that I love. um, so yeah, opportunity to blend and find something that really represents me.
That's a beautiful thing about food is you can do that, all those fusions. And I was thinking as you were talking about how nice it is to have even that little piece that you feel good and confident about and have almost to not show off, but show off to your, people come to you because they know you're Chinese and they're going to look to you for, cooking, or can you teach me something, or what are your cultural blah, 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 blah. So it's nice to be able to have something in your back pocket to say, you want to learn something about my culture? Here's what I know, and here's what resonates with me. And, and I do that through food. And here's, so it's not like you don't have anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's also an opportunity for me to share kind of this part of myself with a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that a lot of my friends, especially those that I'm making in my adult life, they forget or they don't know that I'm adopted,
Mm,
because it's not something that always comes up in conversation. And
right.
it's usually not like the first fun fact that I share about myself, just because I don't even see it as a fun fact. It's just a part of me. And sometimes I forget to share it. Um,
Mm.
so then when I do show up with dumplings or whatever it is, or maybe it's not Chinese food, it's just something that I've made, it becomes a bigger conversation about, oh, how did I begin to enjoy cooking? And then it turns into a deeper conversation about my background.
Yeah.
Um,
Before we go on, we're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. We still have so much to talk about. Hey there, Adoption Roadmap fam. Are you ready to take the next step on your journey to parenthood? If so, head over to our website and take our quiz. It's called, Are You Ready to Adopt? It's not just about testing your knowledge. It's about making sure you're emotionally and practically prepared for the beautiful, complex journey of adoption. Let's make your dream of parenthood a reality. Go to rgadoptionconsulting.com and take the Are You Ready to Adopt quiz today. That's rgadoptionconsulting.com. The quiz is free, and it will let you know where you are in the process and if you're ready to jump into your adoption journey. So you brought up earlier that you grew up in a household filled with artists, that you are an actor and your parents are actors. How did that shape your identity and the way that you express yourself? You talked a little bit about how you could create, whatever you dreamed up basically about who you are and what you want to be. But how has that shaped you in other ways too?
Yeah, I just grew up in a very creative household. Creativity was something that was championed in whatever form.
Mm-hmm.
So there was lots of arts and crafts, lots of music, any form of art and creativity I've tried at some point. So that was always encouraged, and I grew up around people who were very creative and have huge imaginations. And I think that having the space and I guess the external validation that my imagination can be as large as I want it to be, that's the limit is somewhere beyond the moon and the stars and the universe. Yeah. So everything was about creativity. And I never felt like I couldn't express myself and what I was feeling. But that being said, I wasn't the most emotional or expressive kid all the time. I definitely went through periods of being a little bit more withdrawn, and I think I found other ways to express myself during those phases of my life, because looking back on it, I think that there was a lot that I was trying to process without the help of therapy or external support beyond my parents and family. But I still found ways for myself to express and understand what I was feeling. Because I think that as an adoptee who grew up in very white spaces, there were, as I got older, there were more questions that I had about how people of color are treated in this country. And why do I not know anything about my cultural history? And why does all of the media also not look like me? And becoming more aware of those things as I was becoming a teenager and getting older, and also realizing, oh, all of my friends from school are pretty much white. I think that those frustrations came out in different ways, but I don't know if I put the pieces together then of this is how this relates to my, I guess, trauma, if you will, of being adopted and where that actually comes from and stems from. That those weren't things that I thought about really deeply until I was into college.
Have you ever used acting as a way to hide yourself, or in the opposite manner, as a way to release some of your feelings, but under the guise of I'm acting?
Yes to both. I think that acting is an amazing thing of you really can become anyone. So I think it very easily has become a way of disguising myself,
Mhm.
of putting on a mask, putting on face, to kind of shed whatever is going on in my personal life and being able to present to someone else who I never thought I could be. And at the same time, though, being able to express myself in ways that I never knew I could, and that have been very cathartic.
Mm.
So yes to both. It's sort of a double-sided coin of how much do I show myself in my acting and how
Yeah.
much do I not show myself.
Is there somebody in your life who you feel totally comfortable being your authentic self and being able to express whatever you need to express, whether that's crying or laughing or really sharing some of your really deep feelings?
I mean, probably both of my parents. I'm very comfortable around both of them,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, they're the people who know me the absolute best.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Because I think that could have gone the other way too, that they might have been the people that you hid your true feelings from the most, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I've definitely thought about that too um of how grateful I am for our relationship, because we definitely all have boundaries with each other, but I think that that's what makes our relationships work and why we do trust each other the way that we do. Um so yeah, I definitely have my boundaries with my parents of just kind of being like, I don't want to talk to you about this thing right now. Maybe I'll talk to you about it later, but I don't want to talk about it right now.
Sure. I mean, every kid does with their
Yeah.
parents, right? But um, you made the decision at some point in your life that you didn't have an interest or you didn't care to search further for your birth parents. How did you come to that decision? Was it always the decision for you?
I can say that the question of do I want to search for my birth parents is a question that I've gotten my whole life at every age,
Hmm.
for as long as I can remember. I think that it's a very common question to receive even from people I've just met who find out that I'm adopted. It's a very early question that people tend to ask, is as soon as they find out I'm adopted, more often than not, the first question they ask is, oh, have you searched for your birth parents? And do you want to find your birth parents?
And what do you want? How do you want to react every time you get that question?
I give them a little bit more of a nonchalant answer of, I haven't looked for my birth parents because it's hard. I don't really go into the details if it's someone I have just met,
Yeah,
because I don't feel like I owe them that explanation.
100%.
But how I came to the actual decision of not looking for my birth parents, that's not a hard line decision. It's something that I find myself circling back to at least a couple of times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I'm actively checking in with myself about. But how I came to that decision was something that I was pretty certain about from a fairly young age, of knowing that there wasn't a lot of information about my adoption. My most international adoptions are closed adoptions, um, unless it's arranged prior. But a lot of international adoptions, it's much harder to do the birth parent search with it being in another country and
Mm-hmm.
having to work with another government and having to go through their records and their databases and whatnot. I have done 23andMe and other DNA services to potentially find relatives. And that's something that I'm absolutely open to. And that's also why I keep circling back with myself and checking in and because I know that if I do want to do the birth parent search, I can always decide one day that,
Sure.
okay, let's do this.
So that
And
door is open.
yeah, that door is open. But I know that for my own peace of mind, it's not a door that I must open. It's not something that I won't, it's not something that I really want to set myself up for disappointment with either. Again, because I don't have a lot of information about my adoption case and situation, it would be like finding a needle in a haystack a bit. And it's not impossible. It's not impossible. I do know international adoptees who have reconnected with their biological families. And for a lot of them, it was a very long process. It can take years. So it would definitely be something that I need to be ready to invest in. And I just know right now I don't want to invest in that kind of time and emotional energy. And for me personally, it's more important for me to connect with my culture and my heritage than it is to actually find my biological family.
Did you find any other relatives?
The closest that I've found is like third and fourth cousins, so not very close. But I think that the interesting thing is that a lot of them are also adoptees.
Oh,
And then the other interesting thing
so
is
you
that,
did reach out.
yeah, or some of them have reached out to me, which is always
Okay.
cool too. And then I actually connected with one relative because we live in the same town,
Wow.
which was just by coincidence.
And you never went there as far as asking questions about if they knew your parents, or did you?
I think that third and fourth cousins, it would be really hard to, I guess, track.
You never know. Yeah.
It's not impossible, but
Right.
if
But you're
they're
not there
all,
yet.
yeah, but if they're also adoptees, then like I know that they don't have
Right.
answers either.
Absolutely. Speaking of adoptees, you have and cousins, you have a cousin that you mentioned earlier, who was adopted. You don't live near each other, but she was one of your closest, if not the closest childhood friend that you had. And you have more than one cousin, right? Or other friends who were adopted, right?
Yeah. I do have other friends who are adopted. Even in college, I had other friends who are adopted. But yeah, one of my childhood friends is also a Chinese adoptee.
Oh, okay.
And we connected because our moms put us like in an after school Chinese class together. But the funny thing is that she really had no interest in it. And that kind of went on to represent our relationship, is that I was always open to answering questions about being adopted. She didn't really take any interest in it. She didn't want to partake in any cultural activities. And even now, we do talk about being adopted pretty frequently when we catch up, but we have very different views on it. And I really respect where she comes from and
Sure.
what her feelings are about it, and vice versa. So we have very different views about how we came to be adopted and why we came to be adopted and how we feel about it. But there's definitely still a really tight bond between the two of us because there's this thing that we don't have to explain to each other.
Yeah. How do you feel about being adopted? And
I mean, I'm really proud to be an adoptee. I love the adoptee community. It's never something that I've felt ashamed about being. I think that I've felt more of a disconnect and shame around not knowing about my heritage and being Chinese. But the adoptee part of it, I've always been really proud of. So
Thank you for sharing that, because I think there's a lot of people, hopeful adoptive parents, who will look on social media and find a big adoptee community who have a lot of anger or have a lot of negative things to say about adoption. So I appreciate hearing another side of it. And I know that that doesn't represent everybody. Everybody has their own personal story. And I find that the people who have the best relationship with their identity and their adoption story aren't sharing it as much on social media as the people who like need that outlet.
yeah, and I totally understand the people who do feel a lot of
100%.
resentment and
Mm-hmm.
anger, and I will never discredit that.
For
Um,
sure.
I just think that for me, when I think about the circumstances of the universe, I don't really see any other way of how things could have played out better, I
Yeah,
guess.
that's awesome. So when you had having these friendships growing up, did that give you a sense of like solace or solidarity, having these connections?
Uh, at times, I think that having other adoptee friends felt like solidarity, and at times it also didn't because, I, like we were just talking about, adoptees have all of these different experiences, and we don't all connect with those.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the adoptees that I grew up around in my community, particularly in the Midwest,
Yeah.
I felt like I didn't identify with them for a lot of different reasons, whether it was just borderline interests of like
Yeah.
some were very like, we're gonna go play on our soccer team, and I'm like, I'm not good at soccer, so I'll be watching. Sometimes it was just stuff like that, and sometimes it was more of like um, things like people coming from different religious backgrounds that my family, I didn't grow up religious, so that wasn't something that I connected to them about. Or just growing up in kind of different environments. Some of them grew up with siblings. I'm an only child, so that also could have been
Mm.
something that I didn't relate to. So yeah, it was a mishmash of things. Of sometimes I connected with the adoptees that I grew up around, and sometimes I didn't. And I
Understood.
I try not to overcomplicate it.
Yeah. Well, you're a pretty laid back kind of a girl. So I once heard that I once listened in on a panel of adoptees, and I remember specifically one saying that the person she felt most connected to and that really played a huge part in her life was her therapist, and that she firmly believed that, well, everybody needs a therapist in life, but men that adoptees should always have a therapist in their life that they can truly, trust and have that kind of relationship where they can share whatever they need to share. So has therapy played a role in your life? And if so, how and what prompted that?
Yeah, I didn't go to therapy until I was in college, which a lot of people might consider late, and some people might consider young.
I consider it right on time.
I do know that for a lot of adoptees growing up, it is often recommended that adoptees have access to an adoption therapist throughout their childhood. And I think that that's great. I think that for me, it wasn't something that I ever asked for, first of all. It wasn't something that I ever expressed to my parents, oh, I'd like to see a therapist as a child. And I also don't think that, at least when I was a teenager, I don't think I would have known what to say to a therapist or how to express what I was actually feeling to my therapist.
We have a lot of clients because we tell all of our families that you should engage with an adoption competent therapist now. And I always tell people, if you don't know what to say, just say, my consultant said I should call you. We're trying to adopt. I don't know why I'm calling you. And let them let them take it from there.
Yeah.
They'll know. They'll know.
Yeah. So, uh, yeah, because I didn't really begin processing a lot of my feelings about being adopted until I was in my later teens and my 20s. So I decided that I wanted to see a therapist when I was in college for a lot of different reasons, but one of them being I do find that as with my adoptee background that I am prone to loneliness and periods of depression. I am not diagnosed with clinical depression or anything like that, but I do have low periods where I find myself feeling incredibly alone. And I absolutely connect that to being adopted. And so I knew that during a particular time when I was struggling in college, of feeling lonely, of that loneliness really affecting my day to day and my judgment and just my everyday interactions with people, I knew that going to a therapist was something that I felt like could really help. And when I did start looking for a therapist, I knew that I wanted someone who had worked with adoptees, whether that was their specialty or not. I knew that I wanted someone who had worked with adoptees before or adoptive families and had also worked with women of color.
So and those you found that?
Yeah, that was my criteria. And then
it's not easy to find. How did you find that?
Luckily enough, I was able to find a female Chinese American therapist who had worked with adoptees. I was very, very lucky to find exactly what I wanted and was looking for. I know that that's not the case for a lot of people, but I just lucked out, and that was just from Google searching.
That's awesome.
So I connected with that therapist, and it just was... It felt like a huge relief for me to have someone who I could talk to on a lot of different levels about all of these different sectors of my identity and how they intersect, and how they act with one another. Because I do tend to separate the pieces of my identity of being a woman of color, being an adoptee, and all of those things. And they all have different facets to them, but they do all come together. And it was so relieving and so gratifying to talk to someone who got every single part of that. Yeah. Because a lot of therapists, at least from talking to my other friends in therapy, they're like, yeah, they get pieces, but they don't always grasp the whole situation of who I am. But I felt like with this therapist I did. And I was very lucky. I will say I'm not in therapy currently. I felt like when I was working with that therapist, it was only for that time period because of a couple of different things. But the main one being I felt like I was working towards a certain goal. And once I hit that goal, I wanted to go back to experiencing the world with my new knowledge.
I love that.
I think I will go back to therapy. It's something that I'm always going to be open to and see myself doing.
I mean, there's nothing better than sitting on a couch and letting somebody else just listen to you for an hour, talk about whatever's on your mind. I mean, we all need that. You talked about how there were, all these different parts of you that you were navigating. Tell me more about that. Like, was there any certain part that you have struggled with the most in your life, whether it's being an adoptee, being in a transracial family, living in a white community, being a woman, being an actor?
I think that for me...
Being a cook.
Yeah, I think that for me, most of it was growing up in a white community. I grew up in Ann Arbor, which is not the whitest place. It's pretty diverse for a city in the Midwest. but still the people of color that I did grow up around, our experiences were very different.
Mm-hmm.
And I definitely gravitated towards aligning myself with whiteness. That's what felt comfortable to me at the time. And when I went to college, it felt like an opportunity to shed a lot of that.
Why was that important to you?
I didn't feel comfortable connecting with my heritage during like being a teenager. I think that's normal for a lot of teenagers to kind of reject what is not considered cool. But and I didn't feel like my culture was cool. And I think that once I got to college, I had a lot more examples in my personal life and also within the media, because I think that the media has shifted a lot in the last decade of showing a lot more diverse faces, not just people of color, but in other ways as well, to reflect what I'm actually thinking and feeling and experiencing in my personal life. So once I had more examples of what I could be, I guess, or how I could express myself, I felt like I could take that into my own hands of how I wanted to go about implementing that for myself. And yeah, I just began to have, I guess, a watershed moment of feeling like, well, I don't care if this is cool or not. I'm gonna do this.
I love it. Cool only lasts so long, anyways. At some point, none of us are cool anymore, or we all are.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with we all are.
And now a lot of my friends think that Chinatown is the coolest place.
I love that. I love it. What advice would you give to other adoptees who are navigating their own paths to self-discovery, and also to hopeful adoptive parents?
Wow, to adoptees. I think that what I have to say to adoptees, I already said in a way of, don't seek yourself in others. Take inspiration and then reflect deeply and really find yourself in that. Especially because at least my particular diaspora in the adoptee community of being an international adoptee and being a transracial adoptee in those communities, I think that there's even more questions. And unfortunately, I know that I won't get all the answers. And instead of obsessing over figuring out those answers and really spending my time looking for that, I'd rather spend my time being at peace with myself and healing and feeling okay with what I do have to offer.
Such wise advice. And what about to hopeful adoptive parents who are maybe about to adopt transracially, transculturally, or just somebody even who looks like them? What advice would you give them about raising an adopted person?
I think that to hopeful adoptive parents who are adopting transracially in particular, I think that take it as a wonderful opportunity to have a colorful, hugely cultural blend of a family. I love that my family unit, but also my extended family, we really do come from so many different backgrounds, and I love that we embrace to the best of our ability everyone's culture in some small way. I think that it's awesome that my family's Thanksgivings and Christmas and whatever holidays we show up to. There's a myriad of dishes from so many different places. So stuff like that. It's the small stuff of making sure that everyone feels seen and heard within your family.
That was the thing that resonated most when you were talking about your therapist, is that it sounds like you found somebody who really saw you for everything that you are.
Yeah.
And that's all we ever want, is to just feel seen.
Yeah.
Right? And understood. Speaking of cultures and identity and looking within yourself, tell me about your name.
Yeah, so I go by Josie Mi, which is my first and my middle name. My mom chose my middle name from the Chinese word mi feng or feng mi, which is honey and honeybee. So that's where that comes from. But yeah, I don't use my last name, not because I don't like my last name, but actually the funny story is that my last name actually doesn't biologically relate to anyone in my family. It was an adopted last name. My grandfather was adopted by his stepfather, so it's not a blood name. And it's also cool because so my last name is Leidenfrost, and I am the last of our family's Leidenfrost branch. So
wow,
yeah,
there's something there too. My son is the last of my family's last name too, Gruenspan, and I think about that a lot. I've always wanted to get rid of my last name because it's so complicated. I've always wanted Smith, but there is something cool about, I don't know, and you might not always be Leidenfrost, but you go by me. And why did you choose that?
Well, it mainly was just because when I was little, that's what people called me. They called me Josie Mi, and they used it as almost like a hyphenated first name.
Okay.
And so that was what felt like me as I got older. And again, my last name wasn't something that my parents felt super attached to. And my mom didn't take the last name, so we all have different names, so it can be confusing at times for people to figure out that we are related. But
you don't look the same, you have different last names, and yet you're all one. I love it. Well, Josie Mi, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think.
Thank you so much for having me.
There's been a lot of golden nuggets in here and a lot of things to really think about. But as you know, I end with quick fire questions. And hopefully you didn't look at them before today. No cheating. Okay. The first and last ones I ask everybody, which is name a person or organization who has impacted your life as it relates to adoption.
I'm going to give a shout out to Adoptee, which is an organization for particularly Asian American adopted teenagers. It's a conference. They now have conferences for Asian American adoptee adults as well. And it was something that I attended growing up, and it's usually just a fun weekend for this group of adopted teenagers to get together and have a little bit of fun.
I love that. And just for context, because I didn't ask you at the beginning, how old are you?
I'm 23.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted I wanted that for context, because a lot of times when we're sharing stories with adoptees who are a lot older. So I just wanted to bring that in for context. What pisses you off?
I don't like chocolate.
Chocolate pisses you off?
And chocolate kind of pisses me off.
Who are you? Okay. Moving on.
That's a weird one, but
how did I hire you? I'm kidding. What are you most grateful for?
I am most grateful for, well, Right now, I'm most grateful for the fact that I have a fan in this room because it has no AC. But on a deeper level, I'm really grateful for my mom in particular. She feels like just the best person to me.
God, it's what we dream of hearing from our children.
My dad's great too. So
Shout
if
out
he
to
listens
him.
to this, shout out to my dad.
All right, cool. Do you have a favorite line from a play that you've been in or not?
Oh my God, so many great lines. I was in a play a few months ago called The Chinese Lady, which is about the first Chinese woman to come to America. And there's this line towards the end of the play. I'm trying to remember it exactly, but it's something along the lines of, it is a beautiful thing to be seen, but it is a much more beautiful thing to be understood.
Ooh, it's exactly what we've been talking about. Ooh,
Yeah.
What a way to bring it all together and wrap it up with a beautiful bow. But to do that even more so, describe adoption in 3 words.
Complicated, wonderful, and a journey.
Love it. Thank you so much. Remember, success is a continuous journey. If you find yourself veering off course, just steer back onto the roadmap until you reach your destination. And whatever you do, never lose hope. Hope is that light inside you that will lead you to your dreams. Thank you so much, Josie.
Thank you.
And thanks for listening. Bye-bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. If you did, I have a few favors to ask of you. First, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're at it, I'd love to hear your takeaways. Please write a review and let me know what you liked. And if you have a question or a suggestion on what you'd like to hear, I'd love to hear that too. Please shoot me an email at support@rgadoptionconsulting.com and let me know what you'd like to hear about. And if you have a question, I may just answer it online. Thanks again for listening. Tune in every Wednesday and Friday morning for a brand new episode of the Adoption Roadmap podcast. Until next time, bye-bye.